Aristotle was an ancient Greek philosopher. He was a student of Plato and wrote in the 300s BC. We're obviously focusing on Aristotle's ethics in this video. For more on Aristotle, you can take a course in ancient philosophy, of course, or see videos on ancient philosophy on gordonpettit.org. Aristotle's ethics has a primary focus on virtue or character. So he is more concerned about the character of an individual than he is about specific right actions or promoting good results. The important question that Aristotle wants to ask or address is not something like, what should I do? What should I do next kind of thing, which seemed to drive both Kant and Mill's moral theory. Instead, for Aristotle, the important question is, what kind of person should I be? And Aristotle notes that the level of precision varies according to the subject matter. For Aristotle, one of the things that meant was you couldn't have precise rules when it comes to ethics. So consider sports compared to math. Aristotle's not going to find a rule that's inviolable, right? You can do that in math. So when you're given a problem in math, you better have a specific correct answer. So if somebody asks the square root of 139, that's not, around 12. It's 13. That's the correct answer. There is no other correct answer. But consider, on the other hand, something more complex like sports. So I mean complexity in terms of its predictability. When we participate or observe or coach sports, there are strategies that can't be extremely precise. So suppose for a basketball team, somebody has a team with a really good center who's tall, a good scorer, and the strategy going into a game might be to pass the ball inside, get it to the big guy. Now that may be the primary strategy for the particular game, but that doesn't mean you always have to pass it to the center. You take what comes. So if there's a wide open short jumper for somebody else, they should take the shot. You can't write out all of these exceptions with exact precision, but Aristotle thinks that life is much more like sport than it is like math. And so therefore, so should ethics be as well. You just can't have precise moral principles. So one of the questions that drives Aristotle is this question, what is the good? And he first gives us a broad idea of the good by thinking about human activities. And he says, all activities aim at an end. Now, he actually thought this about the activities of animals and plants or anything else in nature. And the good is that at which all things aim. So all activities aim at an end, and the end that it's aimed at is the good for that activity. So for example, he gives a few examples. When you're practicing medicine, the good that you're aiming at is health. When you are a military strategist, the good that you're aiming at is victory. In economics, the good that you're aiming at is the acquisition, maintenance, and growth of wealth. All of these activities have a good at which they aim. And Aristotle wants to find the ultimate good for humans. He wants to identify, what do humans seek first and foremost? What do we aim for ultimately? Now, not in any specific endeavor like practicing medicine, but what do we aim for in our life? Now, the first thing that Aristotle did is to consider some suggested answers to that question, what do we aim for? And he ruled out some responses. So, unlike Mill, Aristotle says we don't aim at pleasure. That is not at least the primary aim of our lives. He goes on to provide the criticism that we have already seen if you've considered Mill's ethics. The vulgar might claim that pleasure is the ultimate goal, but that puts us on a par with beasts or with pigs. Now, also, some people seem to live their life as if wealth is the ultimate good. And Aristotle criticizes this view by saying that wealth is only good for obtaining other goods. So that can't be the primary good. In other words, we want money in order to buy food or shelter and other things. We don't clothe ourselves with money. Well, I don't know, maybe Lady Gaga has, or someone else has done that, but that's not what we normally do with it. We don't eat money. And Aristotle considers a couple more options, but for our purposes, we can note that those also fail. So Aristotle embarks on a new strategy. Instead, he asks a different question. What attributes does the ultimate good for humans have? The plan is that if we can identify the attributes of the ultimate good, then we will have more insight into what it is. So we turn our attention to the ultimate good for humans. What attributes would this have? This is the main task in ethics, to identify the chief end or the ultimate good for humans. The chief end is complete, or the final end. It's never done for the sake of something else, right? Unlike acquiring money, as we mentioned. It's more like play. So think back to the 3rd grade or so, what your favorite time of school was. And I know some people would give different answers, but many people would say their favorite time of school was recess. And like most recess, for myself, I wanted to play. That's like most kids, you know, during recess, that's what I wanted to do. So we might make up games, we'd throw the football around, we'd tackle whoever had the football, we'd play soccer or kickball, and often there was no score kept, and it really didn't matter to us. The play itself was what was important. And that's kind of what the chief end is like. It's not done for the sake of anything else. So I wasn't out there playing as a 3rd grader thinking about, oh, this is going to make me healthy and develop my lungs. That it was just for the sake of playing, right? And that's what the chief end has to be like. The chief end is also self-sufficient. Now, that is, if it's achieved, then nothing else is lacking. So if you have it, you don't need anything else. So whatever the ultimate good is for humans, it has to have those two characteristics: being complete, not being for the sake of anything else, and being self-sufficient. So when it's achieved, or you're in the process of doing it, you lack nothing. Now, how often we are deceived about this. Now, I won't delay this too long, but we're often in circumstances where we think something along these lines. If I would just graduate, then my life would be great. I wouldn't lack anything. Or if I just had that job that I want, or if I get married, or if I have that car, or if I have a child of my own, or if I have a house, right? The list can go on, and so goes your life. And often we're deceived about this, but in any case, let's move back to our topic at hand. What's the ultimate good for humans? And Aristotle uses this word eudaimonia, which is translated as happiness. So we have the Greek word eudaimonia. In any case, we typically translate it as happiness. Happiness is well-being, and it's definitely not merely pleasure or the absence of pain like Mill defined it. Like, that's not what it is. Aristotle rejects that idea. Happiness is the chief end for humans. It fits our criteria. So eudaimonia, another way that I might translate it instead of happiness would be flourishing. So the eudaimonia is being all that you can be, to steal a slogan. It involves utilizing one's skills, resources, intellect, character, talents to the fullest extent that you can. It's being the best human that you can possibly be. So this might involve learning math and science, learning to read and write well. If you're musically inclined, it might include becoming a good musician, or at least being able to appreciate good music if you're not so inclined. If you have talent for sewing or creating art, it's developing those talents. It's being physically fit, though clearly Aristotle emphasizes the intellect much more. It's developing all that you are to the fullest extent. Happiness, or eudaimonia, is complete. It's something that's a perfection. It's sought for its own sake. We don't seek it in order to get something else. We don't engage in it in order to accomplish something else. It's an end in itself. And happiness is self-sufficient. If you're happy, you lack nothing. And often as a parent or someone who cares about you may say, or have said the phrase, I just want you to be happy. So I recall when I sought my parents' advice about a career choice I was considering, that's the response I got. I just want you to be happy. Now, I thought it was very unhelpful at the time, but typically it's a very sincere statement. When a child is happy, then everything else is of little significance. And that's what people who care about you want. When you're happy, you lack nothing. So let's get a little sharper on our definition of happiness. Aristotle says that happiness is an activity of the soul while conforming to reason, done with virtue or excellence over a complete life. Now, the Greek word arete, that we translate virtue, can also be translated as excellence. So I have both of those words there. Let's think about this definition a little bit more carefully. So the idea is that happiness is the chief good for humans. And that's, in fact, similar to many of the other ethical viewpoints proposed. Why is that? Right? Why is it similar? Well, for one thing, when you have this activity of the soul that's done with virtue, it's enjoyable. It brings pleasure. It also brings honor. One of the other things that Aristotle considered as the chief good, we didn't mention it, but that was another thing he considered. Obviously, it emphasizes excellence, something else that Aristotle considered as a possible candidate for being the chief good. Eudaimonia has all these other things that we value. We experience pleasure in the process of being active in our soul while conforming to reason and doing things with virtue. It's enjoyable to be virtuous. So unlike money, no one can take away your virtue also. You can be more comfortable being virtuous and knowing that that's something you have. It also tends to bring honor. When somebody lives a virtuous life, they're typically honored by others. Obviously, the excellence is embedded in the definition as we stated it, so it includes excellence. So the virtuous or good person takes pleasure in living the good life. Now, unlike Kant, for Aristotle, the person who does the right thing or the good thing, being virtuous, ought to enjoy it, take pleasure in it. Aristotle rejected the idea that pleasure is some additional thing that must be sought, like Mill seemed to think. Again, to put it in the context of our other two moral theorists that we've considered, Mill and Kant, Kant thought that the best thing to do was to follow the law. Even if you didn't want to do it, you do it because it's the right thing to do. Now, Aristotle, in contrast, says you should want to do the virtuous thing. You should want to live a virtuous life and enjoy it. Now, of course, Mill's whole focus was on seeking pleasure, but Aristotle said the truly enjoyable life was one lived with virtue. Now, pleasure and pain are still relevant to Aristotle's view. He doesn't completely ignore these. Pleasure and pain are significant in two different ways. One we've already hinted at. But first of all, pleasure and pain are related to training so that one develops the habits that are reinforced by pleasure and denied by pain. So you train a child, for example, to behave in a certain way. You reward good behavior. You punish bad behavior. So pleasure and pain are related to training, to developing virtues, and that's true with adults as well as with children. Now, pleasure and pain are also significant because they reveal the moral character of a person. So as we were just mentioning, if somebody has a good moral character, they will enjoy living a good life. If someone doesn't, they're going to be pained when they have to do something that is good. That's an indication that you aren't really virtuous, or at least not in that way. Now, one final aspect that we should mention of Aristotle's view of morality is that moral terminology is irreducible. That is, moral terms are defined in relation to other moral terms. So we talk about things like habits and virtue, and in trying to define them, we don't reduce goodness, habits, virtue to pleasure or pain, for example. We don't use moral terms like the good to talk about things that are physical processes, like what we experience when we experience pleasure or pain. Right? We don't reduce these concepts of morality, like the good, to something else that is physically measurable, like Mill, I think, would have wanted to do and seems to do. Now, we need to think more about what virtue is, what it is, how to develop it, how to reinforce it, those kinds of things. So that's what's addressed in Aristotle's Ethics, Part 2.